What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the albums of Voivod.
We all need to spend some time away from Earth.
Alright, another long one today, so let's just get right into it with War and Pain all the way back in 1984. Pretty basic 80s thrash and speed metal album with those kind of Venom vibes and also a healthy dose of straight up punk and rock and roll. Nothing particularly noteworthy here, especially considering the albums that we're going to get into. As always though, I want to leave the disclaimer that just because I put an album at a particular level doesn't mean that's the grade I would give it if I was reviewing it. I'm just trying to differentiate. I don't want any more than like 3 albums per tier, so that it's actually an interesting ranking. So I'm going to put this one at D tier, and if you don't like it, well, you can make your own. Next up is Rrröööaaarrr in 1986, the year I was born. This feels more like the true beginning of Voivod now that the progressive influences are starting to come into play. Not forefront as much yet, but still they're coming in. It's starting to sound more like what you would come to expect from these guys. It's kind of combining those same thrash and speed metal elements from the previous album with a little bit more of their own unique personality, which is always important, which is why they're a known band in most cases. All in all, it's an improvement, but it's still not something I would pick out of their particular discography if I was in the mood to listen to a Voivod album. And if I wanted something else in the thrash genre, it wouldn't be in my first thoughts either for that. I'm going to put this one at C tier. Killing Technology, 1987. So right from the intro on this one, you can tell that you're in for something a little different. I like to imagine people back in 1987 hearing this for the first time and being like, whoa, like what is this? So once more, the progressive and also conceptual elements are coming more to the forefront at this point while still crafting increasingly catchy tunes too, I would say. Title track is extremely infectious and fun to scream along to during the chorus particularly, balancing this with its weirder and wonkier moments, which is a tough tightrope line. A lot of bands are either like really weird and bizarre and esoteric or like super catchy but kind of like fluffy popcorn kind of music. Not so here. You kind of get the best of both worlds. So speaking of the riffs too, they have this very like discordant sound to them, which is pretty special to this band. It's like definitely one of their trademark elements in terms of their tone, but it's also probably not for everyone, might be a little bit of an acquired taste. I like this album a lot. I don't love it, but regardless, it's a marked step up and also pretty damn consistent, and I would call it a very important album. I'm going to put this one at B tier, and they just climb on upwards. But now, speaking of important, we have Dimension Hatröss in 1988. So now we're getting into the albums that I really came here for, and I'm guessing that most viewers probably came here for as well, with the sci-fi concepts coming into full play, the band's mascot, Korgol, front and center on the cover in all of his glory, and the musicianship largely shifting to the majority percentage now being prog. And I'm not sure if I'm the only one that gets a lot of early Primus vibes from this album, maybe just as like a kid who grew up in the 90s, but I can definitely hear how Voivod may have been an influence on them. Maybe just a hint of Megadeth in there as well. Vocals get more diverse here too, tying into the storytelling elements, and the guitars do a good job of crafting this world around them. It's a far more textured and mature album too than anything that has come before this one, and not an album I would particularly call perfect either, but still like very important, just a legacy album, mostly very enjoyable and just special. And Rolling Stone seemed to think so as well, as this made number 78 on their top 100 metal albums of all time. I tend to agree that it deserves a spot, and I'm going to push this one all the way up to S tier. Next up is Nothingface in 1988. Now, if we're ranking these in terms of critical success, Nothingface would technically be at the top, as it's their only album to make Billboard Top 200 at 114, which is pretty impressive. This is also probably the album cover that sticks with me the most in my mind when I'm thinking about this band for whatever reason, and fortunately though, the musicianship holds up to that across the board, and it deserves the ratings that it gets. Like sometimes albums get elevated up just because they're like more manufactured for the mainstream. Not so with this album. Like, it is still very good and some of their best work to date, I think. Lots of great performances across all members, from the guitar to the drumming, but I feel like more and more it's the bass that really steals the show for me, and that's going to become a trend on some of their later albums as well. In any case, it's cool to see them continue to push their boundaries with songs like Astronomy Domine and Missing Sequence, and I'm sure that fans from their early period would never have expected to hear an album like this. Again, I'm just thinking about their initial reaction. This one belongs at S as well. In fact, I would put it a little bit higher. Then we have Angel Rat moving into the 90s in 1991, released on major label MCA2, but was not as successful as Nothingface despite that major label support, and I can hear some potential studio influence on their shift to a more rock sound on this one. I'm not sure if that's the case. I'm not as well versed in Voivod as some of other big fans out there, I'm sure, but I'd be interested in the comments if people have anything to say about that. But anyways, like, the prog is still there, but it's packaged much more like a Rush album, which I don't know about you, but that's just not really what I'm coming to these guys for. I love Rush, but that's not what I want from Voivod. Ultimately, though, it makes sense when considering that this is produced by Terry Brown, who did a number of Rush's big albums. Unfortunately, it fails to be as good as any of those albums from Rush, and it just falls a bit flat after how interesting things were just getting with Nothingface. I know in particular, as I was marathoning these one after another, it was kind of disappointing to move from that to this one. I'm going to put this one all the way back down at D tier. A triumphant fall, unfortunately. Next up, we have The Outer Limits in 1993. This album was also dropped on MCA and continues with a somewhat similar sound, though I'd say it's a little bit more engaging overall, and also contains their longest track, Jack Luminous, which is over 17 minutes. This one feels like a little bit more of a compromise in their sound between the newer stuff and their metal elements, but still kind of on the corny corporate side for my taste. I know that's definitely an overgeneralization, considering that there's still clear creativity and risk-taking on display, and some people seem to really enjoy this one, but it's just not for me. Regardless, as always, this is a subjective ranking. I'm not saying that this is the way that they should be ranked for everyone. Me personally, I'm putting this one at C tier. Speaking of which, we have Negatron in 1995. So this album sees bass player Eric Forrest step up on vocal duties since Dennis Snake left for a time. And honestly, I really like what it brings to the table in its sheer ferocity. It's like a weird mix of Max Cavalera and Al Jorgensen, which suits the band's return to their kind of heavier metal roots, this time going for a more sort of industrial vibe. I'm willing to bet that this one's rating varies from fan to fan, but as somebody who really enjoys industrial metal, this is right up my alley. I love the hypnotic driving rhythms and somewhat droning qualities, and then you get headbangers like Nanoman and Planet Hell. Even if it's a little clunky at times and lacks some of the impressiveness of Nothingface and Dimension Hatröss, I still rank it pretty high. I'm going to put it up at A tier. Then there's Phobos in 1997, the second and last album with Eric, and pretty much a continuation of Negatron, though dropping some of the industrial vibes more in favor of groove and some more experimental touches. It also has some cool, more atmospheric elements, as on the title track and Bacteria, attempts more to even utilizing accordion and hand drums. It's a pretty interesting experience that I'd recommend, even if it's not one of their more popular albums. It may not align with their more kind of core sound, but once again, maybe an upset here. I'm putting this one at A tier as well. But sadly, my enjoyment will not last in this next era of their sound with Voivod in 2003. Dennis makes a return here on vocals with Jason Newsted of Metallica fame on bass. And I gotta say, I was really bummed from the minute I pressed play on this album to hear them not only going back to rock and roll, but doing so in a way I found way more bland than on Angel Rat. This is just terrible. I'm not exaggerating here. I know some people in our Discord said that they enjoyed this album. That's totally fine. We have different opinions. Again, I'd love to hear them down in the comments, but me, I just could not stand this. Just terrible, run-of-the-mill music with nothing special about it, and unfortunately, this will also be the last album for guitarist Dennis DeMoore, as he died of cancer in 2005. So, sad note for him to go out on this, and I mean no disrespect, but this album is just pure lame butt rock, putting it at F tier. And same, unfortunately, for Katorz in 2006, however you pronounce it. Just feels like a load-reload era Metallica album, except without the hits to show for it. Like, at least those albums have some standout songs that I still really enjoy and some great riffs. Not here. Like, it feels like they're trying to ride the grunge wave too, and about a decade too late, unsuccessfully. This one is also going at F tier. And just to avoid sounding like a broken record, Infini 2009, same. I have the same thoughts basically on all three of these. They're all just equally terrible in my mind. Get no enjoyment out of them. It was a chore to even listen to them. And again, if you love them, great. Like, I'm not telling anyone they should hate these albums. Just me personally, that's my taste. So then we have Target Earth, though, in 2013, and it's nice to hear them getting a little bit more weird and proggy on this one. It's still not enough to put it on par with their earlier material, but I had more enjoyment with this one. By a long shot. It's the first album, too, with Daniel Mongrain on guitar, and definitely more variety and creativity on display. This just feels like a rejuvenated lineup. They remember what they came here for. Or what the fans came here for, I don't know. But in any case, it feels like there's passion involved, like they want to make this kind of music again, and that's important. If they wanted to just keep doing butt rock, then by all means, keep doing it and just leave me out of it. But this feels genuine. I like it a lot. I'm going to put this one at B tier. Then they followed that up with The Wake in 2018, and so the quote from this one was that the music is like a futuristic prog thrash metal trek with many twists and turns. The story involves the usual Voivodian topics, I like that term, and disasters, chaos, conflicts, strange plots, and alternate consciousness. So I think that is actually a pretty decent summation of this album. It's pretty similar to the previous one. Not quite as good, I would say, but probably mostly because it comes back to some of that yowly vocal style, which was another element that annoyed me on these F-tier albums. I don't like that vocal style. There are a handful of bands that can pull it off, mostly like the people who originated it. I mean, I enjoy some Pearl Jam, and I love Alice in Chains. Like, Lane Staley's the master of making that style actually sound good. Not so here, not so. So that's one of the main things I would say that kind of like is a detraction from this, because the instrumentation otherwise is really solid. So lots of great solos too, and just guitar work in general. I'm going to put this one also at B tier. Which brings us to the main event, Synchro Anarchy in 2022. So now we get to talk about the latest album, and I have to say, after revisiting all of these albums, even the classics, especially in a row, I am very impressed. Solid opener with Paranormalium, kind of calling back to their best era, fusing the progressive songwriting with the heavy thrash guitars. Synchro Anarchy follows suit with another proggy arrangement that steps up the sci-fi elements with kind of a spacier sound to it. Planet Eater and Holographic Thinking balance the fun chug with more complex arrangements of guitars and bass, and really making the most out of the entire recording space. And on a related note, calling back to what I said earlier, like the bass on this record, this may very well be one of the best bass performances of their career, if not the best. Just overall, in many ways, this feels like the album that Voivod always wanted to write, and it's captured with crisp production and one of the most consistently engaging vocal performances, once more leaning into more of like a Les Claypool approach. They dropped the yowls. I'm thankful for that. Maybe enough people complained. Honestly, it's probably one of their most consistent albums to date, with every single song having something to offer. There's no downtime, there's no duds. And while the songwriting is also among their most complex, the 48-minute runtime keeps it strangely focused. All taken together, believe it or not, I could actually put this in my top 3, so I'm going to give this one the coveted S tier. Y'all check out my more detailed review of Synchro Anarchy here, and check out this playlist for more metal tier lists, and also if you want to support, you like this shirt, then you can check out the merch store. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.